a little easier. So my name is Kristen Stelljes. I am the project manager for the Central Hill Campus Plan. Really appreciate you all coming out tonight. So this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. So based on the feedback we've gotten from the first two public meetings and the almost 200 people who commented on the online survey, we're going to show the preferred concept at this stage of the process. So we're still very early on. There's still a lot of work that we're going to be doing together to refine this design, but this is kind of like the base map we'll be starting from for the next phase. After presenting that to you, we'll also be talking about our plans for carbon net zero, some traffic improvements related to that preferred design. Really want to get your comments and feedback on what you think. So to let you know who's involved, this is a very multidisciplinary approach from the city. So we have our staff from the environmental and sustainability perspective, from the Veterans Commission, and I want to have the staff who are here tonight introduce themselves so that if you have specific questions and you really want to get into the detail after the meeting, you will know who they are. So we have two staff members sitting over here, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves.
I'm Oliver Sellers Garcia, the Sustainability and Environment Director. Thanks for coming.
Hi everybody, I'm Melissa Woods, Senior Planner in Long Range Planning.
And Courtney Kirk, who will be coming down in just a minute. She's making sure in case anybody who needs to use the accessible entrance would be able to get in. She's a landscape architect, and she'll be the project manager for the next phase of the project. So we'll make sure to introduce you to her once she's here. We also have a great team of consultants who has been working with us this whole time. And I'd like them to introduce themselves, so you know who they are in case you have specific things you'd like to dig in at the end of the meeting.
Hi, Alex Pitkin, architect, and was also the architect for the high school project, which is currently under construction.
I'm Laura Munnings. I'm a landscape architect and planner for SMMA. Liz Calloway with SMMA Sustainable Design. Ashley Hare, engineer, tool design group. And Stephanie Wire, landscape designer, tool design group.
Thank you very much. And so just to remind you where we've come and where we're going, we are now at our third community meeting. This project hasn't delved in specifically into the dynamics around parking. There's another group that has been working on that, although these are very well interconnected. The next parking meeting, if that's something you're particularly interested in talking about, will happen on December 12th. And then this phase of the project is going to be completed by the end of the calendar year. So again, this is the conceptual phase. We'll be moving forward and talking about how we're going to phase that to really dig in and get into the specifics of the design as we move forward. So without delay, I'm sure you want to see what this design is. I'd like to hand it over to Laura from SMMA, who's going to walk you through kind of how the design has evolved.
I just want to give you a little overview about how we got to this point. So we had a first community meeting back in May, and at that meeting we presented the existing conditions of the campus, our design parameters, and I'll remind you of those in a moment. We shared what the results of our stakeholder meetings, so that was meetings with some of the committee members. So for instance, we had meetings about the monuments, library, some of the spaces on campus, as we wanted to get a sense of, programmatically what the city was looking for. And we came to the community and presented that to you, and then also got your feedback in terms of what would you as a community like to see happen here on the Hill. So just to remind you some of the design parameters we're working with, the Somerville High School plan that's already been designed, so we were working, with that design. The Green Lane extension and community path that's going to be coming online. The parking and traffic studies, as Kristen just mentioned. Building and space use plans for City Hall and the 1895 building. So while we're not, studying these things per se, those will be included in terms of, yes, we realize that those things are going to happen. Recreation of the playground and the respectful and chronological incorporation of the monuments back onto the hill. So we took all those things and we developed some concepts, and we brought those back to the community at the second meeting, which happened a couple of months ago. And so, again, we got comments from the committee. We took the feedback given by the community, developed those concepts. And at that meeting, we broke into groups and talked a little more in depth about what you liked or didn't like about the concepts. And they were really meant to get those reactions so we could really understand what the community felt strongly about, including on the campus. And so from that feedback, we noticed some themes from the community. And the top themes were keep the existing trees, give us more parking, and of course, again, respectfully incorporating the monuments. Other themes that were emerging out of the feedback were safe crossings, especially with Highland, accessibility across the site, of course, bicycle safety, and more green space. So we tried to take all the community feedback and, direction from the city stakeholders to come up with a preferred plan that we will be presenting in the report. And as Kristen said, this is a plan. So what it's meant to do is guide the future project designs in terms of how the space should be used and the character of how that space should be designed. This is our preferred plan, which was very closely related to the third concept, if any of you saw that. If not, all those presentations are still online. You can go back and review. So I'm going to go show some enlargements and give you some imagery to convey to you the ideas of each of the spaces around campus. So the highlights of this plan include incorporating the memorials along Highland Ave, not directly on the sidewalk, but there will be a landscape buffer to give the monuments a little space, but allow them to be viewed by passersby. The honor roll will be relocated in front of the War Memorial Building as kind of a centerpiece within the Memorial Walk. And it will be reimagined in a more interactive way that can be kept up to date. We will realign the vehicular access of the City Hall loop here to align with Prescott. That loop will be a public access pickup and drop off as well as emergency access. We will be maintaining a majority of the existing trees. A few will, obviously have to come down to make the improvements, but the effort will be to maintain as many of those trees as possible and keep them into the landscape. As I mentioned, there will be a vegetated buffer along Highland that will give a new aesthetic to a campus as well as give a setting for the memorials. And we're going to reorganize the green space in front of the library to make it a little more usable. So now I'm going to work my way around the campus quickly to show you a little bit more detail about what that means. So the first thing is providing accessibility to City Hall and the 1895 buildings because these are historic buildings. They weren't built with that in mind. And the idea is to really come up with a aesthetically pleasing way to provide access to these buildings and not take away from their historic character. And so we provided a couple of examples of how that might be done. And obviously, again, in the design phases, this will get studied, and we will come up, with the appropriate design for that. There will be an expanded pedestrian plaza for events that are being held around City Hall, to not just so you're hanging out in the parking lot for some of these rallies or tree lighting or menorah lightings or all the things that go on up at City Hall. So the next slide is some imagery about how that could look. How do we allow cars to move through pedestrian spaces so it doesn't feel like a car space, but it feels like a true plaza while having safe environment for pedestrians and allow the cars to move through as necessary. So we do that with enhanced landscape materials, paving materials, planters, tree plantings in the plazas, and things like that. As we look to reincorporate the memorials along Highland, again, they will, by direction of the Veterans Commission, will be placed in chronological order. We will begin Civil War Memorial at the City Hall end, moving along to the Spanish American, the World War I, in which the Dilboy bust will be incorporated and make that a whole World War I feature. The honor roll at the War Memorial Building, the Korean Memorial, and the Vietnam Memorial. So they're moving in chronological order from City Hall toward the library along that space. Below are images of the memorials themselves, and they are shown in order of how they will be placed. And this is just some imagery to start thinking about what that might look like when it's built. So we can see, out here is a street, there's a landscape buffer, and then a walkway that allows you to engage a memorial. Same here, there's a street and some sort of, this is a built landscape, but it allows you to come into a space that's not directly on the main pathway. There's the idea of making the honor roll interactive, and here's an example of an LED. And just some more ideas about how that landscape buffer could look. Over at the library, we know they have events down there too, movie nights, other types of events. We have children's groups coming in during the day for reading time, all those kinds of things. Teenagers coming over from the high school to use the space after school. So we wanted to be able to provide a green space that's more open and would allow for more flexibility and allow the users to have more control of how they use the space. And also reincorporate the playground. So what we have adjacent to the library are some patio areas that might have some tables and chairs, maybe some fun outdoor lounge seating. If you get your book, a cup of coffee, you can hang out at the library. There's the idea of doing some terracing of the lawn down toward Walnut, take advantage of the slope there. Maybe bring a blanket, sit in the sun in the morning, read your book there. Some open lawn space again for those movie nights and things like that. And then the Reimagined play space. So here's an example of what that terraced green space could look like with some small walls. We would provide a couple of those levels to be accessible, of course. Some patio chairs and umbrellas. And this would be maybe an idea about play structures. Perhaps it could have a library theme that's a little more sculptural and, could be something more creative than just the typical play structures. And maybe a little space for the children to have an outdoor space for reading hour. Another challenging space on campus is the hill, the space between 1895 and City Hall. And there we want to provide an accessible route that will be an important route from the incoming GLX from the backside, from Medford Street side of campus to get up toward 1895 and City Hall. And so again, the idea, because there's the field there, we would have an accessible route, but perhaps we could incorporate, some seating steps into that so that if there's something happening at the field, there's also opportunity to hang out in that space and enjoy the events. We also have this interesting little opportunity along the community path for program. And some of the things we were thinking about, in other locations in Somerville, there are these little nooks. Perhaps it could be for seating, or sometimes there's an exercise an exercise station, perhaps some public art. And this is just like little interesting ways to engage children as you're walking by on the community path. And Stephanie will review the multimodal transit opportunities.
Hi again, I'm Stephanie from Tool Design. We've been working with SMMA in the city to really figure out how does this whole system work with vehicular access, transit, biking, pedestrian access, so that the Central Hill campus isn't operating like an island, and so that it's comfortable to access for all different modes. We're looking at 4 different bus routes in these different shades of blue, neighborhood greenways that are already existing come through. How can we better connect those to the site? The community path that runs along, this is also the green light extension. Laura already was showing you how some opportunities for how that will connect directly to the site. You can see different existing bike lanes. Currently there's bike lane along Medford Street. And we were exploring things related to traffic calming, grade challenges. We'll go through these in all of the next slides. A Wiki Map, an online interactive map, has been available. And we had respondents from a number of different neighborhoods. The most frequent responses referred to crossings. Currently, people feel pretty unsafe in a number of different areas. We had several notes on different crossings needed. And the intersections, they feel dangerous, intimidating. We had specific notes on bike lanes and areas where people feel that cars are coming through too fast. So we looked at all of these different comments. And in terms of vehicular access, we'll come back again to parking within the site. But one big thing that people noted is that there's really a flow problem around the site. We have a number of different one-ways. And so we were looking on School Street, we're proposing a 2-way of the runway as it goes south and to better connect to Union Square.
So just to give you a quick overview about vehicular circulation within the site, there's a drop-off for the high school. There'll be a drop-off, public access drop-off and pickup for City Hall in 1895. This is a service loop for the high school programs. There's loading in, I believe, the auto tech program here. So that's meant for service and emergency access. And again, there's a service dock or loading for the high school here, and then one for the library on the backside. So as Kristen mentioned, there's this separate parking study going on, but we wanted to at least show you that this was the pre-construction condition of Central Hill, in which there were 245 spaces on campus. And at the end of the high school construction phase, there will be 85 spaces on campus, which include a few spaces here at the high school, the spaces to exist or remain behind the library, and a few new spaces on the partially completed loop at City Hall. And this is what remains of the existing parking at City Hall. So again, this is really not in our discussion, but we are sharing it with you, and you can attend this meeting. There's a link for a SurveyMonkey, which you can grab this off of the presentation afterwards.
So moving from vehicular access, currently there's 4 bus routes accessing the site, 80 and 85. The city and the MBTA were working together to figure out how the future GLX extension will affect those. Right now we're looking at different pedestrian crossing options, or those will be explored more in the future with the designs that come along with the GLX. One big thing that people noted was how the north side neighborhoods right now feel very disconnected to the site. So various connection points, some of which Laura mentioned, are being thought about in future as part of the plan and to be worked out as part of the designs going forward. Along Highland Avenue, there are some operational things that we could address. Here at School Street, one thing we've proposed is to move this currently west side stop over to the east, make it a far side stop, with helps with bus operations to get the bus through the light before it stops. Also help pedestrians be able to just do one crossing north rather than two across the street here. That's something that we'll continue to discuss. Along the east side, we're looking at the potential consolidation of a couple of the stops. We are very mindful of the residential towers that are there and the access needs. So this is something that would be looked at in more detail with future studies. But the potential to drop down one site and perhaps move them to increase bus operations at the intersection. In terms of biking, of course, this is a very steep hill. Currently, there's one bike lane along Medford Street. School Street is a very tough climb for people. So, because we have looked at this two-way concept for cars, in the road turning into a two-way drive, that necessarily drops a lane of parking. There's just not enough space for it anymore. But one thing it would allow is for a climbing lane for bikes and parking that would remain against campus. Of course, people need somewhere to go once they get to the site. So there are several locations that are being thought out against the high school, serving the community path and the GLX. Still, there will be maintenance of a bike share station, but the quantities, the amount of racks that would be available at each would be figured out as designs go along. But bike parking in all different areas of the site. So, again, one big thing we heard is the need for comfortable pedestrian crossings and more crossings, because when we look at this, we can kind of see how long you have to go until you get to what are currently the only signalized pedestrian crossings, and we have a mid-block crossing here at Vinyl Street under the War Memorial Building. So we've looked at some just suggestions for crossing improvements where they already exist, and then all of these solid boxes here are showing you places where new crossings are proposed. So we'll just run through just a couple as examples. On Madison Street at School Street, you can see the potential bike lane coming through, but a big part of this that we've proposed here is a raised crossing. What that'll do is, as drivers are coming down this slope, again, if on this two-way, that's going to slow them down and make pedestrians as they cross much more visible. So that'll be really helpful there. Under the War Memorial Building, we proposed a crossing that would have a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, so somebody will come up to the crossing, push the button, turn on flashing lights that are going to help make the pedestrians much more visible from a distance. And it'll be a nice wide crossing for students coming through, kind of an axial relationship with the building here. Oh, and the curb extensions as well, so where the sidewalk butts out will help make that crossing shorter, more visible, more comfortable. In Medford Street and Walnut, we are looking at curb extensions, and where currently there are curb ramps that kind of address two crosswalks at once, we're proposing more directional crossings that really help to clarify to people, particularly people of differing abilities, which way they should be going. Also helping to get people flowing better into the site with the design that SMMA has proposed. So this would be something that could be looked at elsewhere on Medford Street. So that brings us, that kind of covers access to the site through all different modes, and now they'll continue with access in the site.
Thank you, Stephanie. Again, my name is Alex Pitkin with SMMA. So one of the things that we knew coming out of the high school project was there was some 1,600 students planned to be arriving at the high school. And so that led us into a detailed conversation about thinking of the campus as a whole with the many various uses that will be on the Central Hill. And so really starting to think about this as gateway entry portals. And so this really builds off the traffic analysis and a lot of the detailed thinking that Laura has been doing. And it's really kind of amplified the early conversations we had just about the high school project. And so there's a multitude of uses on the Hill. Many people aren't even aware of how many things happen within the high school that are accessible to the public, that are part of the CVTE programs that the public can come and use. And so they all have very appropriately identified entrance points and access points. And of course, City Hall itself, obviously a major magnet. The 1895 building as a potential expansion of some of the City Hall programs, and of course the library as well. So there's a lot of activity on the campus, and so our need is to make that relevant, clear, and simplified. And as part of the high school project, all of you are very aware this is a very steep site. It has some 80 feet of grade change across the north to south axis, but it also has almost 20 feet across the east to west along Highland Avenue as well. So there are challenges for accessibility everywhere. And so these routes that you could study if you want to look at this map a little bit later have been thought through. They've been talked to with the state MAB and with the city's accessibility coordinators as well. So that we can make sure that everyone in the city has ease of access to every point on the campus. And so part and parcel of that is also a wayfinding and finding a way to make people understand with clarity where exactly they should and can go on site to find the various city services that will be available. There's various levels that we think about when we think about our graphic design team and doing signage. And so you can see these that are sort of identified. Sometimes there's actually building signage to let you know that you are entering City Hall. There are auto specific signs to where to turn in for those drop-off components. Pedestrians who are coming to the city who don't know the city, how do they find their way? And obviously many of us who are city residents, we maybe know our way, but it's also got some additional information and identification components. So there's a lot of things that we would need to elevate that signage to, and this starts to show them and map them out. And as the design evolves in the next phase, these are the kinds of things that would actually be detailed. Some of them belong connected to the GLX or to the MBTA and those bus routes that were explained to you by Stephanie. We have already maybe 25% of these signs are already in the package with the high school project as part of that. It's required by the state guidelines, the piece of the component that they're helping to fund for the city. And so we've talked with the city about maybe building off of that design attitude that was already started with that project. We want this to feel like a campus, very cohesive in its design. And then obviously directories so that everyone in the city understands exactly what is available on the Central Hill campus. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
So as you may be aware, if you've come to the prior community meetings, part of this campus planning exercise is looking at how we can create a carbon neutral campus as part of the city's goal for being carbon neutral by 2050. So before we get into what the recommendations are, I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of the process that we've gone through. First, we started out by considering what are the potential renewable energy resources that are available to us. Looking at things like solar photovoltaic, solar thermal, ground source heat pumps, and also looking at things like campus or district systems using combined heat and power, and really try to kind of explore all of those and think about what the advantages and disadvantages of each of those is. And also looking at a combination of, what can we produce on site versus what might need to be purchased from off-site. Then in combination for that, we look at what are the energy needs on the campus and which energy needs can be best served by those different renewable resources. The primary use for energy on the site is for operating buildings. So an important component of this is thinking about how do we create very low energy buildings on this site. So we try to take an approach of what are kind of the simplest ways that we can do that. So looking at high performance building enclosures that really drives down the amount of heating and cooling energy that's needed, and then serving those reduced needs with very efficient systems. The other piece that we're considering is time. While we're looking at a comprehensive plan for creating a carbon neutral campus, it's not necessarily going to happen all on day one. So what are the things that should happen at over this roughly 30-year period to arrive at that goal at the end in 2050? So in the short term, looking at things that we can do more easily, the city's looking at how can they purchase more renewable energy in the near term to offset some of that carbon emissions from current energy use on the site. The proposed high school is going to be PV ready, so maybe in 5 years' time you look at putting a PV system on the roof. Then maybe on the 10 to 15-year scale we're looking at the renovation of City Hall, 1895, the library. So again, that's an opportunity to make those very efficient buildings and look at integrating rooftop PV. And then we're also thinking about even 20, 25 years down the road, when the high school systems that we're going to be installing in a few years are approaching the end of their lifetime. So what do we do when we replace them to help support that goal? The other thing that we're thinking about in parallel is some of these other goals for the project. So things like we also have some goals related to stormwater management and water efficiency on the site. So given that we're in an urban site, even though it feels like a very large campus, there's a lot that we want to do. So if you're using areas below the ground for infiltrating stormwater and having rainwater harvesting systems to offset toilet flushing, then there may be some trade-offs for thinking about maybe using a system like geothermal wells, because the spaces can't be used for both things. Or for looking at campus systems, and also considering things like, making sure that we're not having subsurface utilities that are interfering with the war memorials and things like that. So just really thinking about all the space use and balancing all of the various goals of this project for the site. So based on what we've looked at so far for this study and that we'll be finalizing in the report, we're looking at avoiding any fossil fuel-based combustion on the site. It looks like we're probably going to end up with more building-based systems rather than campus-based systems. There'll be a combination of both on-site renewable energy as well as purchasing from off-site. Just given that we're in a dense urban environment, it's difficult to provide enough on-site renewable energy generation to offset the energy needs of the buildings, even when they are going to be much more energy efficient than they are now. The renovated buildings and new addition will probably make the most sense to have those be all electric based systems. And then we're also looking at various policies that the city can establish to help support these energy goals going forward. Things like maybe establishing a purchasing policy for equipment to make sure that everything that's going into buildings when it gets replaced is very efficient, and some things related to refrigerant management and that sort of thing. So I just want to emphasize again that this is a planning exercise, and so it's not necessarily that any of this is set in stone, but what we're trying to do is really look at all of the opportunities and resources that are available to us and what's the most sensible way that we can lay out a plan to take the city from where it is now to its goal of being carbon neutral in 2050.
So before we get to public comment, we wanted to give you a sense of how we're planning to move forward with all of this. So there's a lot of moving pieces on this site. So the first thing that's happening, of course, it's already underway, is the renovation of the high school. And so, you know, this is moving forward. But the next thing in terms of buildings that the city would like to do is renovate City Hall and the 1895 building. So we don't want to move forward with completing any sort of landscape design that would then immediately have big trucks driving on it and ruin it. So we're trying to think about how we can move forward to have as a complete and beautiful landscape as we can at the conclusion of the high school, but not preclude future additions and work done on the other buildings. So what is going to happen next is we're going to move forward to further the design immediately on this portion of the campus. The high school will cover this section that has already been included within the budget of the high school. These additional pieces will need to be contracted out separately, and so we'll see this circle completed by 2020 and these purple sections finish or starting in 2020 when there's enough space for that work to begin. You'll be seeing in the next year some design meetings to really go in deeper. Okay, so this is kind of what we're thinking about, what you're seeing tonight, but what are we actually going to be doing? How is it actually going to feel? So be looking out for those meetings. And then when we're going through the process of renovating City Hall in 1895, the design of those buildings is going to incorporate the landscape design for those projects. And this is because if there are changes to the entrance and accessibility around these buildings, the landscape needs to be able to respond to that so that we have accessible routes. Because we wouldn't want to have a design for these and then the building changes and then you would need to change the whole landscape. So we're trying to think about this in a holistic way so that all of these teams will be continuing to talk to each other and work together, but do it in a way that makes sense within the broader changes that are going to be happening around the buildings. And then the very last phase will be around the library. So you may remember back in the 90s, there was hopes to expand Central Library that were dashed by the recession. Those hopes are still there. We're just not sure when we're going to be able to move that forward. So the idea, and you maybe noticed this from the design, is it shows that there would be a extension off of the back of the library. The assumption is that's what's going to happen because our Central Library is a original Carnegie Library. It's a local historic district. The assumption is that the Historic Preservation Commission will be most amenable to any extensions being off the back so we don't disturb that beautiful historic facade. So we don't want to move forward immediately with the landscaping around that building because, again, through the construction of that extension, we would just be putting large buildings and construction work right on top of it and almost immediately ruining the great work that we have. So we want to get into your feedback. Before we do that, I want to introduce a couple people who have come into the meeting who will be able to also answer questions. So one is Courtney Kirk. So she will be the project manager for the project going forward. She is a landscape architect and will bring a lot of really good thought and skill into that process. And Viola Augustine is our GLX liaison, and she's helping to make sure that the changes happening around the Gilman Square station are very well connected with what's happening on the campus overall. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions, thoughts, feedback that you have.
I'm not sure if this is in scope or not for the for this project, but has the city considered a combined bicycle and bus lane along Highland Avenue?
Yes, so we have talked about that, and I'm going to ask Ashley from Tool to be able to give you a better technical answer about kind of the limitations of the approach like that.
We have looked at that sort of thing. Right now, a big concern is parking and those impacts. And on the slide where Stephanie showed the crossing at the mid-block where it's got the curb extensions, those don't really work with that sort of configuration. So for now, the plan is to keep it separate. And also another thing is with the community path coming through, a lot of the bike traffic on Highland Avenue is likely going to divert to the community path.
And another thing we're looking to build out is the neighbor ways. And so that, so you have multiple ways via bike, even though on Highland, because of the, all the needs that we're trying to accommodate, that is maybe not possible, that there will be other routes in parallel to Highland. Because I know some people who are bike advocates were really excited about the promenade idea, if you remember that, but that would necessitate taking out all of the mature trees. And so that just, was not a popular decision, So we're trying to, balance all of the different needs on the campus while making sure we're definitely providing safe bicycle access to the campus. What other Joe? Let me give this to you. So,
thank you. I was wondering. I didn't hear any references to the study done for the high school from the Consensus Building Institute by the Consensus Building Institute from the Barr Foundation, because I'm concerned about that because. In the first place, that subway station in this high school will be halfway between MIT and MIT and Tufts, and nobody seems to have paid any attention. Second, because there is nobody from the school committee on or school board or school system on your committee. And then third, because they're changing the rates of tuition reimbursement at the state level, so that students from other cities would be attracted to a school that does the kinds of things we're now talking about for doing in that school. And so I really am concerned about what kind of projected travel volume will the Gilman station affect on the school.
So that was a lot of questions. So you hold us accountable to making sure we answer all of them. So I'll do some of them, and then I'll pass it on to Alex to answer some of the questions, in particular around thinking about the high school and programming for that. So it's my apologies. The school, we do have representatives from the school on the committee. I just didn't pass that name on to SMMA. So Jeff Curley, who's the chief of staff for the school district, serves on our committee. And then I was meeting with Leo and Sibi actually yesterday. So they're involved in this process and are very aware. SMMA is meeting with them every Wednesday about the overall high school project, and the campus plan is one of the things that is discussed along that. I'm going to ask Alex to answer the questions about the consensus building report and volumes. Or Tool may be able to answer questions about the volumes expected with GLX. Or Viola, do we have that?
I actually couldn't understand any of the questions. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we can somehow.
Yeah, let me try to see if I understand your question. Is it about the population that the high school is designed for?
Well, the high school is designed for 1,590 kids, and It's got 1,200 now.
Yes.
So that's a whole other bigger issue, and that's a much messier problem. But the real question is, if the school is built as is planned, it will have space, and it will be able to attract students from other districts. And the reimbursement rate is changing dramatically, so that in fact it will make money to do that. And the secondary question with that is, how many regular kids will take the subway to go to school? Because it's an easy GLX access for the existing population. What is the projected volume of student travel on the GLX and on GLX to that station?
So I'm not aware of any studies that were done about how many students or even staff would be using the GLX to get to the high school. I don't know if the GLX has any data on that.
I know the one thing, so there's the resident survey. Sorry, I should have taken this. The resident parking survey is going to be asking people about how they're planning to access the site, and same with staff. Do you, once the green line is here, do you think you might be using that? So that might be our best way to start to get at those numbers, unless you know, Viola, of something that's been done.
Nothing studied, in particular for high school students. There's probably, and I couldn't quote you the numbers, overall ridership that is expected, but not particularly to the high school students.
So our surveys that were done during the design of the high school, of course, really won't matter because those students will be long gone. But the staff were certainly surveyed, of course. And so we can go back and find out what those numbers were for you. I think it was a moderate number, but I don't want to put a number out there and be misidentifying that.
But I'm just also wondering how would that affect recruitment of staff? There's a whole lot of things that will impact.
Yeah.
And it's not there.
So we are definitely looking at that. So we're doing the parking assessment and the transportation assessment internally. So that's happening in parallel. So Mike Tremblay, who's one of our transportation planners, is not able to be here this evening, but is definitely part of the conversation. So I think if you go to the meeting on December 12th, they may have some, at least of the preliminary results from the surveys that are being done, and that will definitely be posted online.
Are there any estimates on the volume of traffic for the Fab Lab that'll be in the high school? That's an extended hours.
So Alex was saying that the high school might have that, but that's not something that we have. What other questions do people have?
I don't know whether or not I just missed something there, but I'm a little perplexed. Can we go back to the different levels there, slides? And no, actually thinking about the different levels of getting around on the campus there, because there's obviously different levels in the site, and so maybe, but one was the one that was showing how you navigate, and there was going to be, I thought, ADA access for people. Okay. All right, so how one actually travels if you're have a handicapped and physically getting from the GLX up to the Highland Avenue? I mean, I'm just totally missing.
Sure there is. So the GLX head house, so to speak, is here. The community path will allow folks coming off the train to come to the community path from the GLX station, okay? And then, so this will be a landing point. There is a slope that is within regulatory guidelines going up to School Street. And then what we had created for the high school was a similar, you can see there's actually a sidewalk along this pathway here. So that's within regulations. This is all flat, obviously, once you get to this level. As part of the 1895 project, there will be the installation of an elevator that can also bring you up to the back of the 1895 building and a Belvedere, and then that is all level. You're at the top of the hill at that point, so now you have access to City Hall, you have access into components of the high school or the 1895 building. So once you're up on top of the hill, you have many routes and many opportunities. These off of Highland, we can't go straight in, although there'll be sidewalks, and most people will obviously go straight into the site. But that's why we have identified these paths that will take you towards the major entry points, because that cuts across the slope that I was telling you about. It goes up about anywhere between 6 feet on this side and 12 feet on the 1895 side. So that's all been thought about in terms of desire lines and how folks coming from Highland would actually want to move up to the top of the hill. And then we have some very challenging points, as Laura had talked about, between City Hall and 1895, creating a place that would be, not just a series of ramps, but would also provide a place of respite. And then between the library and the high school on the eastern side, we do have a ramp system that also brings you up to the far side of the high school. So there's been a lot of consideration given to how to access every part of the site.
Does that include bicycles on those paths as well?
I don't think bikes will take that. There is a stair underneath the covered walkway from the GLX that is a public way, and we've actually put a bicycle ramp on the side of that stair like you see in Europe. So we have considered even things like that. It's a bit of a haul. You have to have the agility to actually take the bike up that pathway. There's a crossing path on Medford Street, so the community path goes across there. And then it crosses on this side and crosses the street down on School Street. So there's lots of ample bike parking that's been provided as part of the high school project, which is a LEED certified project. And then obviously there's been a lot of conversation about making sure that there's covered bike storage across the entire site.
How many kids now ride their bike?
It's pretty low utilization, so we don't have exact numbers.
Any projection for GLX impact on bike riding?
On bike riding, again, we don't have access to the GLX's data.
Those are the kind of numbers that the GLX project folks would have as they're designing both the path and the rail system.
Do they have phones?
I would expect it to be high. I mean, a lot of the folks who are riding on the street today are going to be diverting that way, and it's also going to draw a lot more people to take a bike in, both to the city and into Somerville.
The community path already has a lot of bike riders.
Right, but it's not continuous, but it will be with this.
The engine, David, I'm not sure if you're trying to drive it. There's an element that is at that access point to the GLX. There's a 125 bike storage.
It's for the video.
So there is a bike storage locked shed similar to the other ones, and I think they are committed to putting one at every station, if I'm not mistaken. So this one is nicely centrally located between Medford Street and School Street, right at that entrance point.
It's also adjacent to the community path.
It's on the community path. It's right on it. That's right.
The combination of the community path and the green line is stronger here than it even will be in Davis Square. So the volume should be reflected somehow. Am I right?
Quite sure what the what you're actually trying to ask is a question.
If more people take bikes on the community path and to and from the subway as well as to and from the high school, that's a lot of bikes.
Well, you can't currently take a bike on the green line.
But you can to the path, and you can to that subway station, and that subway station will be the Green Line station will be adjacent to the path. There aren't that many stations now that are adjacent to a path.
Do you want to take this offline and bring it back to? We can address that later, and maybe other people can ask some questions as well.
And this is another transportation question, but so I know this might not be, but the 85 was mentioned. Is it that they're talking about bringing an extra stop closer to the high school to connect to Kendall Square, or is it that they're thinking that the 85 is not needed because of the Green Line?
So the question was about the 85 route and what changes are proposed. Viola, do you want to speak to that, or Ashley? Yeah. You want? Okay, so Melissa.
As of this time, there are no proposed bus route changes around the Central Hill campus area, but our transportation and infrastructure staff does acknowledge that with the Green Line opening, there are going to be some redundancies in the network. So they will be working with the MBTA to look at our bus routing in the future as the Green Line opens. Right, the 85 is not redundant. I don't, though the 85, so the question was, what would the 85 change? And I think the intent there, the 85 is one of those buses that runs at, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, but at crunch capacity or extreme high capacity, and has very limited service in terms of hours. And so I think that because it provides a connection for primarily Spring Hill, but also Central Hill residents to Kendall Square, I think that's something that our staff would be looking to add service to, not take away from.
Can I just, because I live on Renovation on Somerville Street. The 85 already has a problem turning when the traffic is only going south. If you have northbound traffic and southbound traffic, the 85 can't make the corners, number one. Number two, when you get to the major intersections, the intersection at Summer Street, Somerville Ave, and on Highland Ave, you're going to create a major traffic jam. Because right now, the traffic depends on an empty right lane to make right turns. But that lane is going to be devoted to south-going traffic. The other lane is going to be devoted to north-going traffic. There's no place to go. Somebody needs to actually spend a few hours on that street and see what the traffic is like. Number two, they can't pick up trash if you have traffic going both ways. And you're eliminating parking spaces. When you already said you're down to 85 at the high school, is that correct? And right now, if you walk down School Street, most of the stickers on the cars are not resident stickers, they're Somerville City employee stickers, because they have no place to park. So I don't know where that idea came from, but it really needs a good looking at.
Thanks. Sorry for this running around of the microphone. There you go.
So
I know it's probably not you, it's probably the meeting on the 12th.
parking, I'll refer to the meeting on the 12th. The Central Hill Plan's proposal is talking about a two-way school street, in particular from Medford Street up to Highland. The project scope, just like this gentleman had a question about, sort of a bus-bike lane from the high school campus into Davis Square along the extent of Highland Ave. That's something that we've discussed in the course of the project, but we're really focusing on the immediate bounds of the campus.
You showed it going two ways.
Sure, I can address that. Right, so part of the planning process is always looking in the immediate bounds of the project, but also how the campus relates citywide. Central Hill is a resource for the entire community. There's also the work being done in Union Square and mobility across the entire city. And right now, I think it's more low-hanging fruit for a conversion of two-way from Medford Street to Highland, but there is interest for mobility throughout the city of converting more streets to two-way. Granted, it's not going to happen tomorrow. There's a lot of work that needs to happen related to converting, City Hall employees to different modes of transit, because displacing cars off of the concourse means they're parking somewhere else if we don't change them to different modes of transit.
And I would agree with that if there was room on School Street. It's just physically.
Sure, and to acknowledge the 85 bus route, there's no one from the T here to explain, and I'm sure, the route was established many moons ago, but the current terminus of the 85 route, I don't think is ideal, and that's something that we'll be engaging with the T on in the future.
So you were talking a little bit about how the north side of the campus, so like Winter Hill Community, for example, it just has a feeling of being cut off from the campus. I guess, would you be able to kind of rephrase what your plans were for that? And are there any opportunities, I think as you enter like a historic square or a new city, you have that gateway feeling and then you're entering a new place. Is there any opportunity to liven up with public art installations or other forms to kind of activate that space? I know it's still early with the GLX coming in, but.
Do you want Gilman Square as a whole, or specifically entrances to the campus, or both?
I would say, yeah, entrances to the campus, but maybe plugging into Gilman Square as a whole.
So I'll ask Alex to talk about the entrances into into the campus, and then Melissa, do you want to talk about Gilman Square plans afterwards?
For you specifically from Gilman Square is what you're asking, correct? On these.
Just from the north, so looking at, I guess, at those 3 points of what conceptual designs would be able to.
So there's, I won't say that there's necessarily anything that's been defined for artwork, but there has been a lot of discussion about activation along the northern edge here. Some discussion about parkour courses, near and dear to Brandon's heart there, right? There's some. There's obviously a lot of sort of simple signage. Laura talked about this one particular area as a place that's an opportunity that hasn't been designed yet, whether it's a resting place or an activity zone right there off the community path. We certainly recognize the opportunity at School Street as a gateway. There are some rather tallish walls that are retaining some of the earth here at these points, and there's been a lot of conversation about those could be areas for murals or temporary art installations over time. So that's certainly a potential as well. But I think you probably should talk about Gilman Square because that's going to be the real driver.
Okay. Let me know if I don't answer your question, but for anybody that doesn't know, there's a neighborhood plan for the Gilman Square station area. It's available at somervillebydesign.com, but it really talks about bringing the square back to Gilman Square. Generations ago, it was a destination, train station was removed, and a lot of activity sort of moved out of the area. So it focuses on, it's a little bit off the map here, but creating a small green and focusing on infill development in the 4-story range on vacant lots, parking lots primarily within the area. We're working with the GLX team to maintain a strong connection between Gilman Square and the station in Central Hill. It being a design build project, what's in the neighborhood plan was the station design of 2012, and that's changed significantly since then. And so Viola's exhausting a lot of effort there. And we hope to create a lot of synergy in between because especially with the high school, the new construction at the high school and having a better connection, we can see activity moving northward into Gilman Square.
I just going to say that and to compliment SMSA about what's been done with the art students already in terms of the temporary fencing that's been done there and displaying all the things. There's an opportunity since it's so close to the high school, Gilman Square and such. I would imagine that would be an opportunity for the high school students to get more involved as projects there and such, which would be a really interesting way to give them some hands-on experience and really adapt it to the area. So I think it's sort of like when you build roads to some place and then all of a sudden it opens it up and the transit stop's going to do that anyway. So I think in terms of revitalizing that area, it will really happen almost simultaneously with what's happening in that area.
I've got two questions. One is, I'm sorry, could you just explain exactly what the connection is? I mean, I think you talked a little bit about sloped access for people with disabilities, but is that the only access? You go down the community path, then back up?
So you come off the train right at this intersection point. You're at the community path, which connects Medford Street over to School Street. And so at this point, there is I think it's about a 7-foot rise from School Street down to that. No stairs along there. That's all ramp access. Yeah, I apologize. So there's right on that axis. There's a direct route for able-bodied folks to go up a stair. You can see it's got a switchback, and then it's underneath it's a covered walkway from this point all the way up to here. The student-run culinary arts program sort of anchors one side of the high school there, so that's one of those engagement opportunities. But if you're not able-bodied, it's a long ramp because it's a large rise, and you would come back up here, and then you have the opportunity to use this once it's complete, or you would take the elevator.
Where's the main? Is there one main entrance of the high school for student? Obviously the cafeteria's got its own thing, but where do most of the high school students go in?
The secure entrance, the change of that is basically where the atrium is today. Okay, on the eastern side.
The students take the green line in. They have to go all the way around. That's good.
They can come up here.
Sorry, my second question, can you pull up the slide that has the Walnut Street, Medford Street intersection? Okay, yeah, I think that was it. I just want to point out, like, I'm a person who walks literally up Walnut Street every day. That's a really steep slope. And I know it's not, I'm sure neither side's owned by the city, but when I think about the Central Hill and all the steep slopes there, we've had days where we've tried to walk up and literally had to walk back down because it was too slippery, and then try a different path. It doesn't happen very often, once in a while, but just as you think through the Central Hill, any of the paths that are, handicapped accessible, you got to have something to hold on to, because when you're a pedestrian walking up and down Walnut Street, the worst part is the driveways, when there's nothing to hold on to.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. It's really good to keep that in mind. Joe, did you have another question? Oh, okay.
So I guess I have a larger, a more overarching question, and you sort of addressed this a little bit with some specifics, I think, around sustainability. So things like rainwater harvesting, on-site energy sources. But I'm curious along the lines of resilience and flexibility. I look at this particular design, and I'm curious to know how much of this design was created thinking about 30 years from now what Somerville will actually look like and the problems and issues that we might be dealing with at that time. So not even just things along the lines of sustainability, but climate-related things, large emergency times, or people have to come here for some sort of, I don't know, safety, just those kinds of things. So I'm just curious how much of this has been built, assuming that, obviously 30 years from now, Somerville will look a little different. We're going to have more people, and there's going to be obviously more density and those kinds of things. So there might be actually more people using this campus 30 years from now. But in addition to that, 30 years from now, things might be vastly different. So I'm just curious how much that has played a role in this. Thank you.
So I can say that the high school was certainly designed, it's meant to be any project through the MSBA funding mechanism. We talk about at least a 50-year project. Obviously, it'll probably be much longer than that. All the mechanical systems are actually elevated because ground access around the high school is precious. And so it's a fully air-conditioned building. Green air conditioning is what we've been labeling it. So it's really kind of taking the moisture out of the air and really worrying about that comfort and that long-term changes that we are seeing. There is an emergency generator, quite sizable. This is not, the high school was not designated as an emergency shelter, but obviously in a pinch it can certainly serve much of that need. So I'm not sure if that answers that question on the resiliency, but Liz could talk a little bit more about the campus.
So in terms of what we're going to be recommending for the remainder of the campus, in particular for the City Hall 1895 and the library building, certainly resilience is something to consider for the City Hall. And a lot of what we're going to be recommending in terms of strategies to achieve the carbon neutral goal is also going to go hand in hand with making those buildings more resilient. So very well insulated building enclosures so that, in the loss of power, we might look at something like a passive house standard. So those types of buildings have been shown to be able to maintain reasonable space temperatures for like a week without power. Some of the specifics of what exactly the strategies will be and what exactly the level, the level of design for like how those buildings will need to operate in an emergency situation, I think will be fleshed out when we get actually into design. But I think we've addressed a lot of the through the energy performance, we'll address a lot of the extreme temperature events and things like that. And the fortunate thing about being on top of a hill is that the flooding issue is not so much a problem because everything's going to run downhill. We've tried to address that also by thinking about stormwater management, and as part of this plan, we're also going to be significantly reducing the amount of runoff from the site relative to what it is today, and retaining it on site, using it for things like toilet flushing, and also infiltrating it. So we've tried to think about those things also.
Yeah, and I think that, and just to address what you're saying, obviously being on top of the hill, even when I was asking about like 30, and I'm saying as far as like emergency situations, it's almost like I would see that it's more of like accommodating people who would be having to leave flooded areas versus
the area itself having to deal with flooding because of what you just said. Yeah.
Well, thank you for raising those issues. Those are really important. Yeah. And on a smaller level, too, climate change and the changing environment is something we also think about in plant selection, which is something we'll get into in future phases. You remembered?
Yeah. Have you ever run workshops like this with the high school kids themselves? I strongly recommend that you do. Have you ever run workshops like this with the high school kids themselves? Because they are going to live with
So it may not be apparent to everybody, but we have been extremely engaged with the high school students. Yes, they've been actively involved. There's the graphic design department. They are actually helping us think about expressions of that both inside and outside the school. Every single trade has been also engaged as well. As you heard, weekly connection to Leo and to Civi.
Is there students on the committee?
Yeah, Max was actually sitting here, but he came and went. But Max has been on the committee for 2 years, so he's kept us kind of abreast of how the students are feeling about construction and the design. Yep.
Sorry I'm late. So I don't know if you covered this, but I'm curious about the Central Hill, the playground. It's not clear to me what's going to happen there. And I know that it's used by a number of daycare centers during the day. And I also see there's a number of these crossings on the street on Highland Avenue. I don't know if you covered that. They seem to be new. If you could mention it. Thank you.
So the playground, we will be replacing square foot for square foot of the existing playground, and that is per the grant. No, I'm sorry. Article 97. Okay. So we will be replacing it in kind in terms of area. We're maintaining it near the library because obviously we have a lot of children coming in, as you say, during the day and at other times too. One of the comments we had heard throughout the planning process is initially we were showing a small area on this side of the walkway and another area on this side, and that would be difficult for a parent if they had a child of different age groups. And so we re-examined that and consolidated the area together in one space. And so what the idea of this is showing is, there's a larger area that would have some structured play and, working around the existing trees, that we could have a little nook for maybe that would be, where you could have a small reading area for the smaller kids for playtime. There is this other play area that is associated with the high school daycare program that will not be available during school hours to the public, but off school hours would also be, it's a 2 to 5 play space that would be available to the public, not during the school hours. Does that answer the playground question?
So that the second part you mentioned there is square foot by square foot replacement, which is now becoming private.
No, so that is separate from the public playground.
The big one on the bottom.
Yeah, so this is the replacement for the existing playground. The smaller one is a separate program outside of that's being built with the high school.
Wasn't the area in front of the library going to be done much later than some of the other stuff? No, that was different. Okay. That timeline thing on yeah.
So it's what is immediately touching the library will be done much later, but the playground itself will be done in it's kind of the second phase. So that will begin in 2020. So this is where the existing playground is now, and that will be coming offline. I'll let Alex talk to that about the high school project.
And there are detailed phasing plans, obviously, as part of the high school construction. So what's happening today is work to the west of the War Memorial is taking place right now, roughly from about here forward. And so we're not having to disturb that in phase one. Sometime next year, when that comes online at the beginning of the next school year, then we're going to flip over. We've got some internal phases, and then we're going to start this construction. This has to go offline sometime in that after the summer of 2019. Okay, and then this would be commencing in 2020. So that would be out of commission for 2 years, 1 to 2 years, something like that. So we've had a lot of conversation with the library, and we've certainly talked with them about that. They certainly have made it explicit that it's a very important programmatic element for them. Absolutely.
Thanks. So with Hoyt Sullivan being closed, which is also very popularly used by daycares, we have a lot of experience working with our daycare providers to find alternative places to play while we're in transition with different playgrounds. So hopefully you'll come and participate in the conversations about what the playground should be like and how we can improve it, because I think we all recognize what we have now really could be improved in terms of the playground space. And yeah, like I went and I hand-delivered flyers about the Central Hill campus plan to the daycares that I know use this, so they're aware of the changes.
So what you're saying is there'll be a year when there is no playground area outside for kids from wherever.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's the Walnut, which is down the street, Hoyt Sullivan, which is close, at Leathers, which doesn't have play equipment but is space. So we'll be having to be creative. I know. Well, the kids from Pooh and Friends, really make a long trek. So it, again, going back to the hardiness that our children are developing by these long walks up hills, yeah. Yeah, so it would depend on where people are coming from. We'll have to be working with them. But you had a question not related to this. Oh, yeah, the crossings. Okay.
Well, we'd be adding these 3 crossings here. There's already one down by Vinyl, so that would be well used for the playground area. This one will have a rectangular rapid flashing beacon like you've probably seen down at Union Square. And then this one lines up with this, where the new driveway would come out. And it's true that those would take, probably 1 parking space on either side, but it's a safer crossing for everyone who's accessing the campus on foot. And over here in this area, there's already bus stops in that area, and anywhere that we've got a bus stop, there's already no parking allowed. So this condenses that bus stop into a much more defined space. So in terms of the bus approaching and departing the stop, this actually makes it easier because there's like a street or a driveway in front of the bus. And so they wouldn't have to then block what would be parking because they can now use that street space to pull back out. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your original question, so I hope I answered it there.
I'm just curious. I mean, clearly, I'm just counting parking spots on Highland Avenue, and I see, 20 of them disappearing right there. So.
Well, it would not be a huge net loss in terms of putting in these curb extensions.
I might be the only person here that actually cares about this, so if we want to do this offline, that's okay. But can somebody clarify or go through again a little bit more about the historic monuments and such and how that's going to work? Because you showed some examples of things, but nothing that was really specific to the site that I saw, so maybe...
On one of the slides, I showed an enlargement of that area of the plan, and those were all of the photos of all of the existing monuments that are going, and they were shown in order. This is the Civil War memorial with the cannons that will be going here near City Hall. I forgot to mention the Unitarian Church marker will be located in approximately the same place it is now where it belongs. The Spanish War Memorial, or Spanish-American War Memorial, will be the next in line. This is the World War I Memorial that's currently in Union Square, and the Dilboy Memorial, which will be located together in this space. In the middle here would be the Honor Roll in a reconfigured fashion. So it will be updated and reimagined in a brand new space, and hopefully in an interactive way that can be constantly up to date, as Brian has been talking about. The Korean Memorial would be next in line, and then the Vietnam Memorial ending with thought for future needs of memorials to be added. Sadly, but there's so many people to be honored for their service services. So again, this isn't a final design. It's a concept. It's a space planning exercise to say, this is how, when these spaces are designed, this is how the memorials should be addressed. We want them to be in chronological order and, with spaces that they're visible to Highland and all the passersby, but there's a buffer there for folks to, step away from the busy sidewalk and street and to spend time in those spaces with the memorials. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there is a women's memorial that's specifically for the Union Square Women's Post. That monument was removed from Union Square, and part of redesigning the Union Square Plaza, that's going to go back to Union Square. So we're going to do a trade. World War I is going to come up to the hill, and the Women's Memorial is going to go back down. But per ordinance, the Veterans Commission for Monuments, Memorials, and Dedications has jurisdiction over the monuments. So we've been working closely with them in this conversation. They're the ones who requested that they be in chronological order, that World War I come up. And we'll continue to do so to make sure that it's appropriate space for the Memorial Day celebrations that happen there, the Doughboy celebrations around Greek Independence Day that happen. So the other thing is that the high school project is restoring the stone work while these memorials are going to go on a little vacation, take a break, get restored, come back. And next year, the city is applying for Community Preservation Act funds to restore the bronze work and the stone for the monuments that aren't part of the high school project, which would be World War I, Spanish American, Doughboy. No, Korean's part of the high school. But all of the bronze work, even on the monuments that are included in the high school project.
So related to that, what I was really curious about was how you would actually navigate or circulate through those monuments. And maybe it's premature to ask these questions but is there going to be thought given to making it so there's kind of a path that one could go along and feel like you're going along now that we're grouping them all together? And then secondly, you had an elaborate signage plan, which was wonderful to see for the different types. Is there some thought, or will some thought be given to making it so that that's cohesive and that it's more interpretive than what it's been right now? Because a lot of people walk by those monuments all the time and having a clue what they're about, why they're significant and such, and here's an opportunity for us to change that.
So I would say yes to both, and that will be in the next phase of the project. The veterans have this idea of a memorial walk. So, 'cause as you probably know, they do this walk, this procession through the monuments during their Memorial Day celebrations to lay wreaths and acknowledge. You didn't know about this? Okay, well, anyway, that's what they do. And so, we want to make sure that the design is conducive to the use of the space. Are there any other questions?
And kind of a comment. I appreciate that you heard the feedback about trees, because I was one of those that really cared about the mature trees staying in place. Is there eventually will there kind of also be a plan for cataloging what trees are there or what might be taken down, or at what point is that all decided?
The trees have all been cataloged. Do you want to speak to?
That was done with high school. That's part of high school. Samantha knows more about that than I do, so I'm not sure.
By catalog, you mean just recording the species and?
Trees got down so that we make sure that or how does it determine? Is it just because one's in the way when we're doing construction is going to get cut down, or how do we
There's probably a variety. There are a few trees that are unhealthy, and they were walked with the arborist. That was definitely very carefully thought through about which trees are probably not going to survive on their own. Some of them are to make some of these road alignments, which were some safety thoughts that were brought into play there. And then I think when we get really specific with the memorials, we'll make accommodation and we'll try to work around as many of those nice trees that are there as possible. I think the dark trees here are the ones that are existing, and the light ones are the new ones. So they have been very specifically surveyed and located in this mapping plan.
Will we know mean, I guess right now there's like some trees I know already for the high school that have pieces of paper taped around.
Yeah, I would. Well, they would be very specifically identified in that next design phase, to be sure.
So I guess I'm just curious what role do you see specific committees? Like, I know that there's meetings with a couple of different people that are on the school committee. Like, that's awesome around the planning, but just speaking to, in addition to like the public meetings, et cetera, how much conversation will there be throughout the process with
City professionals? Very closely aligned. Yeah. Excellent.
So we're currently accepting applications for the Urban Forestry Committee. So I don't have an exact timeline on when that process will be complete, but I know that this committee is being established to be involved in the public shade trees of Somerville, and the committee, based on where they want to take things, can develop into a larger urban forestry steward committee to address other things other than public shade trees. But we are committed to involving them if they, as the different phases of the project come online, we will definitely, I'm sure they will be involved and established, and yes.
Just to add a quick comment, and that's the point of the final report, is to add that type of language. These are the priorities of the community to, preserve the mature trees, or, with regard to how the memorial should be placed. All that type of language will be in the report, and that's, the kind of the point of the report is it's a guideline for these next design phases.
Yeah, the report will be at the end of the year. I think it's finalized in December 28th, I think, is the day that it's supposed to be due, although I guess most people will probably be reading it after that, because I know I won't be in the office on that day to post it online. But, so look early in the new year. And then also, if you're not already getting emails from me saying, hey, there's a community meeting coming up, make sure you sign up on the email list, because there'll probably be a press release or a community note when it's out. But if you don't see the community notes, the best way to get direct communication about this project in particular is to sign up for the project email list. And so there's sign up sheets for that. And so if you would like more information, these are the places you can go: to the high school website. It's just somervillema.gov/high school or /Central Hill Plan specifically for this. And then if you didn't know, there is a camera that shows in real time, like, the progress of the construction crew. It's quite cool. You should check it out. This presentation, as well as the video of the meeting, will be posted online. So hopefully you come and visit us. And you can always contact me with any questions. And then again, my name is Kristen Stelljes. If you can't remember that, you can just call 311 and say, I want to talk to somebody about Central Hill Campus Plan, and they will direct you in the right direction. So thank you very much. Have a great evening.
So is there anybody else that you should